My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
No matter how pointless it is, we still dig into it and talk about it.
Shall we do British accents today because we're talking about a movie that takes place in England?
Yeah, right. Only if they're sometimes there and sometimes not.
Are you employing the accent coaches for this feature film in not great?
I mean, that was almost Australian where you were going, but
Yeah, I'm not good at accents.
Yeah, I know. No, well,
yeah, I know you're not good at accents. Thank you.
Yeah. Look, we have had privately this conversation more than once, Average Joe. But no, you're good at some accents, but the British one doesn't seem to work too well. And to be fair, I have a similar thing where like my British accent turns into a Jamaican accent if I leave it too long.
I think I don't know the different English accents enough, and so I say different words with different British accents, and then Australian is what I'm most comfortable with because I've listened to the Weekly Planet for so long. I have this innate sense of like how things sound in Australian, and Mjolnir, maybe you can relate to that since you also listen to their podcast.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some words that I'm just used to hearing in like a Melbourne accent now, which is also like a very specific Australian accent that is a bit closer to British than like Sydney. Apparently, I've all my Australian podcasters have ranted about this at some point, and like Sydney's I think a lot closer to that classic
shrimp on the barbie,
like overdone Australian accent. Still not exactly because that's a caricature, but Sydney's closer to that, whereas Melbourne's a lot closer to something that sounds like UK-ish.
Have you either of you or both? I guess you guys do things together because you're married. But have you watched Invincible yet? Because I told you to watch Invincible, and its whole season's done, and it's been renewed for 2 more seasons.
No, we haven't yet. I've meant to. I read a couple volumes at the library back in the day. So I have a general idea of some of the characters, but we have not yet gotten there. Maybe we should look into it. We did finish like 2 different shows this week.
So we could make it our new show. Yeah.
I mean, we started another one too, but like
I heard good things from the Weekly Planet review, so yeah, I'd be interested.
Yeah, highly recommend to anybody listening. It's on Amazon Prime. It's not for kids because there is a lot of gory violence, so like don't watch this with your kids. And then another show I'm watching right now I want to recommend is The Bad Batch, which is like this Star Wars, Clone Wars sequel, I guess, that follows this rogue group of clone troopers who don't necessarily go along with Order 66. And it's just really fun because it's just this random group of these clone troopers that have their different skills, and one of them's clearly designed to look like Rambo. It's a lot of fun, and it ties in a lot of Star Wars elements from the different eras, like obviously the prequels, but then they have like the Empire showing up, and then there's characters that are like from the Mandalorian that make appearances. So it's kind of neat how it's like weaving all the Star Wars things together,
trying to unify the universe a little bit. They used books for that, and then they made them all non-canon.
That sounds really interesting, actually, and like just an interesting concept in general because of the way clones have been established in that universe and stuff. So to have ones where it's like, I don't know, their obedience chips or whatever didn't quite take, or that they had a little more free will than they were supposed to, and see how that affects things is really interesting.
I mean, there was a precedent for it in Clone Wars a little bit. Not so much the obedience, but them developing different personalities and trying to like distinguish themselves from each other. So I guess this is kind of a continuation of that.
Of like exploring that theme of, which is true. Like it is, if you clone someone, the second, like even if like you're 30 and you step in a room, and when you step in the room you get cloned, from that moment on, that person who got cloned from you, even if they have all your memories and are the exact age of you and everything, from that moment on they'll have different experiences than you and will become a different person in some way.
And that's also in Invincible, right?
There is kind of a clone storyline in Invincible.
Yeah, the robot dude.
But back to Bad Batch. It's on Disney Plus, and for me, it's been a great kind of weekly entertainment piece, bridging the gap between Snowy Owl and Loki, which starts this Wednesday of all things.
Yes.
Someone's very excited, and it's not
I'm
me.
so excited. Oh my gosh, my baby boy gets his own show. It's all about him.
But it's not really Loki. It's a parallel whatever dimension Loki. Like it's not the one. Technically, it's not the same one we saw in all the other movies.
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as the clone thing, again, he has the same experiences up to the Avengers movie. So, like, this is Loki straight out of getting his butt kicked by the Avengers. So, like, there's still, like,
it's the Loki from the original Thor and Avengers.
Yeah, and there's still enough interesting stuff going on with that version of him, and before they made some weird character choices in some of the later movies and had him die in a way that was not in character at all, and I'm still mad about.
We watched Endgame, not Endgame, Infinity Wars recently, so she's quite upset about that.
Loki would never die stabbing someone in the front. Like, it's so out of character. Anyway.
Beeper, I'm sure it's because you're French, but you've said this many times, and I just want to the movie is called Infinity War, and you keep calling it Infinity Wars, and I don't want the people to be upset. And they'll be like, he's saying the title wrong.
He does that all the time. He adds or drops plurals.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's definitely.
It wasn't a single war. He was waging many wars on different fronts.
This is true, but also that's definitely just a French thing.
I mean,
anyway,
yeah, but it's still. I maintain that it makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're here today to talk about Cruella, which is
back to the subject at hand, didn't you?
How could you do this to us?
This is the latest live-action Disney movie that has come out where movie theaters are open, which I just looked that up for myself. Where I live in Ontario, it looks like it'll be another almost 2 months before movie theaters will be allowed to open. You could go see this in theaters if you were in one of those spots, but it's also another one of these movies that is available on Disney Plus for premiere access, which is how we watched the movie. But before we really start talking about the film itself, we should, I guess, do a Secret Origin segment. We just talked about this, the 101 Dalmatians franchise in a sense, not too long ago when we talked about that one period of Disney's animated movie history. But do you guys have any special history or attachment to the 101 Dalmatians franchise?
I'm going to be real quick. I watched 101 Dalmatians for the first time this Friday. I had an audiobook in French of the like a cassette of it, and that was my experience with 101 Dalmatians.
Yeah, it's a similar thing, I think. Like, I'm sure I must have seen it at some point when I was a kid, the original cartoon. But the thing that we had a storybook of it, like a picture book adaptation that we would read a lot. So, or that was one of the ones got read a bit more. So that was kind of my main experience with it, was that we had a couple of 101 Dalmatians, little book adaptations of the movie, which was interesting since the movie is an adaptation of a book. We found I did way too much research on the 101 Dalmatians, the entire thing and history and stuff, because I was just really fascinated by like why they would even make this movie, and I was so excited for it to be like a terrible, entertaining train wreck, and and things like that made me. Yes, I made beef pork ribs watch the original cartoon the day before we watched Cruella because I was like, yeah, so we can compare and know if it lives up to the original or whatever.
And lo and behold, they have nothing to do with each other.
I think I merged information about like the first one, like the original cartoon, the sequel cartoon, and then like the 90s remakes all together. So there's like a couple details that I like. Details like in the 90s remake, Anita is like works for Cruella at a at the fashion company or whatever, and stuff like that like I definitely just thought was part of it from the get-go. And I just really there's that scene that like you see that clip everywhere. I don't know everywhere, but of like Cruella like hearing the Cruella DeVille song and being so mad she like jams her high heels into the car radio and breaks it and is like furious. And I kept waiting for that to happen the whole movie, and it did not. So I guess it happens in the sequel. But it's one of those things that's been around so long and has had so many different iterations that it all kind of like swirls together into like one mess in the public consciousness. And I was like, yeah, I know that, but I feel like people don't know it as well as they think they do. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my family grew up watching Disney movies and on the VHSs, so we definitely watched 101 Dalmatians. And I guess I was just the right age because I remember seeing the live action one with Glenn Close as Cruella DeVille. And I remember seeing the sequel to that, 102 Dalmatians. And I think at that point I was just old enough to realize, oh, like there's things about this movie that don't make sense, and this is kind of weird.
Yeah, and like I thought Cruella went to jail in the original cartoon, but I guess that's in the remakes. I kept waiting for her to get arrested. She didn't. The humans have no idea it was her.
Yeah, and I remember like watching like the animated sequel that came out as like a direct-to-video thing. I remember seeing a bit of the cartoon that was made in the 90s about the 101 Dalmatians. And probably the biggest connection I guess I could say I have to the franchise is that we named our first family dog Purdy after Perdita from 101 Dalmatians. So we must have liked them enough to actually name our dog after it.
Yeah. Which one? That it means lost, or like
the
her
other one.
weird origin?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was reading about the original book that this book is based on, or that the cartoon is based on, which has a couple of very different details. Cruella has a husband and a cat who hates her because she drowned all its kittens. Kind of some intense stuff like that. But one of the things is that Perdita is like Pongo has his like dog wife is called Mrs. and Mrs. gives birth to 15 puppies, and they're like, shoot, that's too many puppies for one dog to support, which is fair. Like, it is. That's a lot of puppies. So they just go out and find a random lost Dalmatian who happened to lose her puppies recently out in the street, and they're like, oh, we'll name her Perdita and bring her back to be like a dog wet nurse for the puppies. It's just a really weird like extra detail that they clearly were like, we're just gonna ignore that and put those characters together in the cartoon because we don't want to explain.
I kind of wish I didn't know that actually, because it kind of like makes me think of my first family dog in a different way.
Isn't that so weird? Because like, yeah, I don't know, growing up was like, yeah, Pongo and Perdita, like your dog OTP or whatever, and it's like, nah, Perdita isn't even
I'm sorry, Lady and the Tramp are the dog OTP.
Pongo and Purdy are the ones for me, but
all right, fair enough.
But you know what? It almost is irrelevant for us to have done our SOS for 101 Dalmatians, and we'll get into that as we watch the movie, or talk about the movie rather. We're not going to watch it again now.
Yeah, thank God.
Disney recommended to stream it over and over again.
Yeah, wait, let me read out verbatim the text that because I have Disney Plus on my phone, and Disney Plus gave me this little thing. Critics and fans agree. Cruella is a must-see. Stream it again and again with premier access for an additional fee in your Disney Plus subscription. I'm not going to do that. I feel no need to stream it again and again. Thank you very much. And I do not feel that it was a must-see in any way, shape, or form.
So what I have the Rotten Tomatoes page open, but I made sure not to put the actual numbers in our show notes so that you wouldn't have any spoilers. So what do you guys think the tomato meter is for the critics on this one?
60% or lower.
It should be.
It should be, but what do you think it really is, Mjolnir?
'Cause I looked up, I think the Metacritic score from IMDb was 59%. I did look that up, so I'm going to go with 60%.
I don't know. Rotten Tomatoes is weird, like the way they lump stuff together, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, it basically just every review it's like, is it positive or negative?
Yeah, which there's a lot of in between there. So I'm gonna say that it's higher because it's not the absolute worst thing ever. So like I don't 70%.
So as of right now, with 325 critic reviews, it is sitting at 74% from critics.
Seems high.
Yep.
I think there's enough, like there's certain elements of the movie that are really good that perhaps at least for a critic outweigh like the negatives, and they're like, it was overall good, or it wasn't, like kind of like what you said, it's not the worst.
Yeah, it's the problem with the internet not understanding nuance things and being like, yep, things are the best or the worst. Yeah.
Now there's also of course the audience score, which is based on viewers who like log into Rotten Tomatoes and give it a rating out of like 5 stars. So what do you guys think the audience score is for Cruella?
If the critic is 74, it's got to be higher than that. So I'm going to go with 84. 10% higher.
80s, yeah.
The audience score is currently 97%.
That's ridiculous.
And it got an A from Cinema Score, which is a different rating system where they literally just ask people who have left the theater like what they would rate the movie.
I guess, I don't know. Like, there are good things about it. Like, it's one of the... I have a similar problem with it than I had with The Greatest Showman, where it's like, there are good things about this, but it's not a good movie, is my opinion of it.
For me, I love The Greatest Showman, and I can admit that, like, I completely understand everyone's criticisms, and I'm like, those are valid, but I still love it. And the style and the songs and the vibes are good enough for me that I'm like, yeah, that's what it's about. It knew what it was about, and that's fine. And so like I'm capable of like understanding that and being like, yeah, you know what, the plot isn't what this movie is about. But Cruella didn't quite. I don't know. I feel like Cruella, it needed just like a little bit more plot or a little bit more consistency or substance or something.
Or a focus other than that. Because like The Greatest Showman had a specific focus, which Cruella seemed to be lacking a focus in a lot of aspects.
We'll get into that. But
yeah. So like this, and I think everyone's like the style is good and this and that. And for me, it's like this. If it had a little something more, then that and the style would be enough for it to be enjoyable without being like a masterpiece. But it didn't quite hit that.
So as movie theaters are gradually reopening in the United States and very slowly in Canada, the studios are doing a lot of these day and date releases for theaters and streaming. And at this point, there's still like 3 movies coming out that Disney has announced will get a theater release alongside this Premier Access thing on Disney+. So Cruella is another example of this. It opened in theaters last weekend in competition against A Quiet Place Part 2, which was only being released in theaters, and it's going to be in theaters exclusively for 45 days, so like a month and a half, before it then goes to streaming on Paramount+.
Oh, okay.
So this was like the Memorial Day weekend in the US, so it was like a 4-day weekend for them. So, usually movies that open during the Memorial Day weekend make over $100 million, but movie theaters that are open are still at 50% capacity, and a lot of theaters still aren't open. So would it surprise you to hear that A Quiet Place Part 2 made almost double at the box office what Cruella did?
Not even remotely. There was a lot of hype for this for A Quiet Place Part 2. I feel like Cruella, like, I was very dismissive of it. but I feel like even people who are bigger Disney fans and who are more into the live action sequels even were like, yeah, this one is maybe not like this one wasn't as hyped up as some other ones were, I think. Like I remember when The Lion King came out and it was Jon Favreau, everybody was really excited. Even people who didn't like it were like, this is going to be interesting. I feel like Cruella didn't really hit that. Whereas, yeah, A Quiet Place
Well, there was
generated a
demand
lot,
for a
and
Quiet Place sequel. The Quiet
yeah.
Place did really well, got a lot of good feedback, was an original idea that was well executed, and people wanted to see more of that world.
Well,
Cruella
and it was
is not that. They've already it's a 60s cartoon was based on a like 50s book, and then had like 90s remakes and a couple of sequels that went direct to DVD. Like they've
direct to
all
VHS. That's how old it is.
yeah, like Disney already didn't have a great track record with continuing that universe, and then they're like, oh, we're gonna throw another one out there, and it's like, you've already done this and it did not do well.
well, let's not throw it under the bus. Like it still made $21 million its opening weekend, and we have to consider it was available on Disney Plus for people to buy as well. Like A Quiet Place Part 2, if you wanted to see it, you had no choice but to go to a movie theater to watch it. So while Disney isn't releasing official numbers for like how many people paid for it on Disney Plus, there is this one website called Samba TV that releases its kind of like metrics of like how many people were watching different things. And according to them, 686,000 households watched Cruella during its opening weekend, if you will. Now, you might be like, is that good or bad? According to them, it's 39% less traffic on Disney Plus than Mulan had when it first came out. The biggest caveat there is that Mulan wasn't open in theaters at all. It was only available for premiere access on Disney Plus. So it's the same kind of reverse logic that.
But
And Mulan had more hype too,
Yeah.
because people were like, maybe they'll actually do something different with these remakes and do like a cool historical like war drama thing. And then they didn't do that. But like, people thought the way they marketed Mulan and the way
they marketed Cruella were very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah,
and
so they
people
figure
thought
if
they wanted-
686,000 people bought Mulan, or bought Cruella, that means they probably made about $21 million as well.
Hmm.
Which means if you add the two numbers together, like what it earned in theaters and what it earned on Disney Plus, it's still less than what A Quiet Place made in theaters, but it's pretty close. And
Comparable numbers.
And yeah, and on the business end, Disney gets to keep all the money they make on Disney Plus themselves. The money that's made at the movie theater has to be split with the theater chains. So you could argue that even though A Quiet Place is making more money at the box office, Disney's the one making more money altogether because they don't have to share any of their profit.
I hope Quiet Place 2 takes off and completely crushes Cruella. Not because I like detest Cruella or anything. It's not like it like made me furious, but just because I want studios to learn that like original concepts are good and should be
Rewarded.
rewarded, and they should do more of that instead of making the third or fourth remake of a thing that clearly didn't quite know what it like, that didn't have a clear reason to exist.
On that note, beef pork ribs, why don't you give us what would be the Blu-ray case description for Cruella?
From the very beginning, we were like a family. But as good as things were, we had an empire to destroy. Get her.
Didn't know you knew how to drive.
I don't. It's a world of opportunity. Trust me.
We're a team.
Trespassing, defamation, vandalism. We're just getting started.
Disney's Cruella, rated PG-13, in theaters, or parents who can order it on Disney Plus with premiere access May 28th.
A young orphan girl who may or may not have some kind of personality disorder tries to move up from street thief to fashion icon while seeking revenge for her family.
Very good. That was a very
I can't. It's a weird thing. Like, I couldn't give more details than that without getting into either spoilers or things that you'd need to explain ad nauseum.
Yeah. Now, I've heard you say this many times on this podcast, Beeper, that for you, it seems like there needs to be a reason why a movie exists. And like, you're always asking, did this movie need to get made?
Yeah.
As if a movie needs to like validate its existence. So I guess that's a good way to open. Like, I probably know the answer, but do you think this movie needed to exist?
Absolutely not. In fact, I'll go a step further. I think this movie should have actively not existed for a number of reasons, mostly around the character of Cruella. This did her absolutely no favor. It's completely disconnected from the rest of the franchise. I was slightly hopeful that it might be a like I think I told you when we were just before we started watching it. I was hopeful it would be like a Joker situation where somebody's trying to tell like more of a fashion like Devil Wears Prada style story, but call it Cruella just because of, the copyright and maybe throw in a few characters, but it wasn't even that. It was like there were too many references to 101 Dalmatian. Like if they had just thrown in like Roger and Anita and Horace and Jasper just like as characters and not tried to link them, although again we'll get into that, but like I think then it might have worked. But and this is I recently watched a really good video from Overly Sarcastic Production, great YouTube channel, about pure evil as a plot device and kind of what makes it work. And these sequels, like Maleficent, all those kind of things, are what makes pure evil characters not work. And if you're not making them pure evil character, then you're rewriting them completely, and then you're retroactively making great characters worse, which I think is something that this does to the character of Cruella de Vil. If anybody accepts this into the canon, it actively makes her a worse villain and much less comprehensive.
Yeah, this is definitely under the category of a reimagining. Like it is.
Oh yeah,
it is. There are too many things that are different from any of the pre-existing sources to make it a realistic prequel. And I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with like a new take on a story. Like that's a comic book fan, that's what you're used to all the time with reboots and stuff.
I wish they'd been clearer about that from the beginning. I don't know. Like I went into this expecting a remake, not a reimagining, or I went into this expecting a prequel, which is part of the reason I was excited. Because I listened. So there's this podcasters I listen to. There's this Sans Pants Radio is like a network, and they've got this podcast called Baseless Speculation. Well, they're just like they'll just go off and like baselessly speculate about what a movie will be, and they pointed out how ridiculous this movie is. That like, how do you take this character and like make people like sympathize with her or relate to her, and then end on the she wants to skin puppies and wear them as a coat story beat, right? And that made me want, I had no interest in Cruella before I listened to that podcast episode, and that made me want to watch Cruella because I was like, it will be so funny to see how they like take that and how this prequel gets from point A to point B of her being this like horrible like psychotic like non-empathetic woman who has no care for anything human or animal beyond herself and only cares about fashion. I was like, this will be so much fun like to watch. I don't think it'll be good, but it'll be entertaining. And they didn't do that. They did this whole reimagining where they made her way more sympathetic, and they made it like, oh, it was a bit of gossip that maybe she did a thing and she didn't bother to correct it and all this stuff. And I was just like, you chickened out, man. Like, it could have been so good.
And yeah, like I'm glad you brought up The Devil's Wears Prada, because I was fully prepared for just like a movie like that where like it was about like her rise to power and in her kind of like breaking bad at the end. Like that was what I was like, if they just do that, I'll be happy.
And
But
they almost did.
they almost did.
They could have. That I will just say one more thing really quickly about reimaginings, though. It's part of why nobody liked Age of Ultron, because Ultron was an Ultron. It was too much and too far from what he was to make it work, and I think this did a similar thing. Okay, there's a lot of other problems with Age of Ultron, but like that was my major problem, was like Ultron wasn't anywhere near any iteration of Ultron from the comics. And when you make that big of a change to a character, and once again, Cruella and Ultron kind of have this thing in common where they are kind of pure evil, like having fun with being evil characters. And changing those kind of characters is very tough.
Yeah, so like this would almost work better if it wasn't connected to an existing franchise. Like I feel like if this movie was a movie and you just, she was just some other character, I feel like it would probably be a better movie.
Yeah, and then they could have toned down Emma Stone's Cruella a little bit, but kept Emma Thompson exactly how she was. I will give credit where credit is due. The Baroness or Duchess?
Baroness.
Yes, the Baroness was a great character. I loved every bit of her. It worked. It was great. That she was great. And I love Emma Thompson as an actress, and Emma Stone has good things going with the portrayal of Cruella, but just some of it just didn't match up and didn't make any sense.
Yeah, and this movie, it wants you to care about the characters, and it tries to focus on the character relationships and show you this journey that Cruella is going through. But then there's so many moments where you're like, how did they do that? Or when did they learn to do that? Or
why are they feeling this way?
Or it's meant to, it takes you I don't know how real it, how we're expected to take it realistically, but when you have a character that is born and it shows this is, I don't know, this is probably a spoiler, but you see from the day she was born, Cruella had half her hair completely white and half of her hair completely black. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, all right, I guess this is the kind of movie we're watching where they just sort of expect us to believe that's possible that a child can be born with hair like that.
But then once again, they chickened out in other ways where that's a very cartoony concept of her hair being biologically black and white. But then they were like, no, we can't possibly have her last name be DeVille. And there were other things that they changed to make it more grounded and realistic. But it's you literally opened this movie on a baby with black and white hair, guys. What are you doing? You need to decide what type of a world this is, because this is very inconsistent.
Yeah, and I think that's over. I think I repeated this a lot when we were watching it. Inconsistency, I think, was the biggest problem of this movie. It was tonally inconsistent. It was thematically inconsistent. It was internally inconsistent.
You didn't like the music choices.
Look, I really like Supertramp, and you open on a Supertramp song, and it barely fit, and the part that fit wasn't the part that was being that wasn't in the movie, and then the rest of the songs, half of them kind of made sense in context, and the other half were just we're throwing this in here because it sounds nice.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned that the plot doesn't have a focus, and this is, first of all, this is a long movie. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes long. Cruella's main motivation shifts about 3 times throughout the course of the movie, which I guess you could argue is realistic and how real people act. But then you have characters born with black and white hair, so it's I don't think you're asking us to accept this as realistic.
And also, the reason people like Cruella as a villain, the reason she's an iconic villain, is her consistency. It is her. She's a very one-note stereotype character, but the original portrayal is done so well that it's like they get as deep as they can in that one note, kind of, you know what I mean? And she is very focused and very unyielding in her beliefs and her passions and her goals, and she's like, this is what I've decided and nobody can tell me I cannot have it. And that's that. Like, people like Cruella's tenacity and the way she doesn't give up, and you know, they're like, I mean, they're like, it's bad that she won't give up on killing puppies, but like, you know, you gotta admire her dedication, right? You gotta admire her style and flair as she tries to kill puppies.
And also, like, again, the movie was like trying to convince us that Cruella was going to get there, but she never does. But then when she's like, it's this weird thing. I think the movie was trying to convince you that she might get to Cruella level, but then also had a bunch of scenes that were like, oh look, this is a sweet character moment, but it's like, it's completely undercut by the fact that this is Cruella de Vil. This is not happening. Like, I remember, this is not a spoiler, she has a pet dog at the beginning of the movie. And it's like, okay, that, and, you know, it was kind of an immediate red flag. It was like, oh.
Weird choice.
Yeah, if she has a dog, clearly she's not going to end up one of the a person who wants to skin dogs.
Yeah, like she...
Unless there's a big change, and that big change was hinted at but never happened.
Yeah, it's like either this dog will do something horrible to her so that she, you know, feels no empathy or love for animals of any kind, or it doesn't make sense that she has so little empathy for other creatures that she'll look at a baby puppy that was just born and be like, I want to make that into a coat. You can't have both those things.
Yeah, and the writing is kind of messy because there are a lot of like montages and time skips in the movie, so I had a hard time kind of figuring how much time has passed. Like she starts working for this Baroness fashion mogul during the movie, but then as we get towards the end, like, how long was she working there? I don't know. And it just, you know, I guess I was just left with more questions than I had answers.
And it's not just her though. Like, even Jasper and Horace, why they listen to her and how they do fluctuates wildly.
This movie at one point has like a Clark Superman dynamic where Cruella is posing as this kind of more sheepish, glasses wearing girl who wears a wig during the day, and then she's like parading around as Cruella at night. And as like a comic book fan, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of appreciated that. I thought it was a fun twist to like just have that dynamic play out in a movie where I wouldn't normally expect that.
But again, tonally it was weird because I remember, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but like we were looking into it and it was like, you were the first one to mention when we were chatting during the movie that she might have you know,
dissociative identity disorder.
yeah, but I didn't think it was that at all. And then it started, and that's the thing, it started to look like it was DID, and then it was just a secret identity, and then it really couldn't make up its mind on that either.
Yeah, it couldn't decide whether Cruella and Estella, because I don't think it's a spoiler to be like, they, once again, it's right at the beginning of the movie, they were like, you know what, it's a bit much for her name to literally be Cruella, which is fair. Good choice, okay? No one would name their child Cruella. They could have gotten away with the DeVille, and I think they should have, but whatever. But like, so her name is Estella, her birth name, and they have this thing where you're like, it keeps flip-flopping, where you're like, sometimes it seems like they're going for the metaphorical, like Cruella, you know, like Cruella kind of represents, you know, the parts of myself I was taught to hide, or like, you know, that, and I just have to blend in, and like, or like my mean-spiritedness, and so like it's like a metaphor that like Cruella's come out to play because I can be myself or whatever. But then sometimes the way they do it, it seems like Cruella is another person with very different priorities than Estella, who treats the people around her differently than Estella, and people in her life talk about them as different people, but they never really establish whether they're different people or whether it's like a Mean Girls thing where it's like, oh look, she changed as a person and started treating her friends badly because fame gets to you. And they're never clear on which one that is. And that's something you really need to be clear and consistent about, because it really changes the vibe.
And it undercuts a lot of the more emotional things, because you're not sure whether this is her getting better or realizing who she is as a person, or just, Estella's replaced Cruella.
And most of them, a big part of the movie, it seemed like Estella wasn't an act. Estella was who she was, and then suddenly she's like, no, actually, who I really am is Cruella. But they're like, but Cruella's is a bad person, and then like at the end, she's apologizing for stuff Cruella did. But now she's like, oh, I'm still Cruella, but now I'm like, or like I'm a mix of Cruella and Estella, maybe. But when it's again, it wasn't clear. And if it is supposed to be DID, it is not a good representation of DID, and I'm sure people would be mad about that. But like they leaned a little too much into that. As
now, I think that if they were to strip out all of the connective tissue to 101 Dalmatians, that this movie might have worked.
Yes. It still wouldn't have been a great movie, but it would have worked.
It would have been better than what we have.
Like Roger did nothing. Roger was a pointless character that added nothing, changed nothing in this plot.
Had nothing to do with who Roger was in the original. Like he's a lawyer now instead of like a musician.
But like, and they pay lip service to the fact that he plays piano at a bar sometimes or something like that.
Yeah.
And then like Anita could have stayed in as a wink, but at the same time her character does nothing. She changes.
I don't even mean that. I mean just like literally, and you could have the same plot, just have her not be Cruella de Vil, and just have the story about this, street thief turned into person who wants to get in the fashion industry in 1970s England when the punk era is coming out. I think this whole
process also not a good representation of the punk era, but yeah,
the character would have
worked better.
Would have ticked me off less without the Cruella associations, because it's like this is literally not Cruella de Vil. But so either they had to do that, like what you said, Average Joe, and take out those elements and just make it this Devil Wears Prada thing with a secret mystery behind it that's going on, and fun reveals ensue and whatever, and that's an interesting story, I guess.
Lean into the heist aspect of it a bit more than they did, as opposed to like leaning into the backstory and adding random Dalmatians and adding random tie-ins.
Yeah, like they could have made the street thief, they could have explored the street thief thing more and the fashion thing more, and just had those be the focuses. That would have worked.
Speaking of fashion, like I wouldn't be surprised if this gets nominated for best costume design at the Oscars next year, because I'm not a fashion guy at all, and I'd be curious what you think as a cosplayer, Mjolnir, but I thought all the costumes and the fashion stuff was like very impressive looking.
Oh yeah, the style was like, if this movie had more focus, consistency, and substance, then the style would be enough for me. Like it would be like The Greatest Showman, it would be like, you know what, it's not the most well-rounded characters or the greatest storytelling or whatever, but there's enough there that it's a solid movie, and then that style, that extra style, elevates it to being good. But the style was gorgeous. She had so many great looks. That's and that's part of the reason people like Cruella in general, right? Is her style, and they got the style right. It's the characterization that's wrong, which makes it harder to get into the style, I feel. And even like that's the thing that the other option to make this movie better with minimal changes, even if they just changed the ending and just doubled down on the fact that she is Cruella, a horrible person who does not care about anyone but herself, who's in the cartoon, her one of the first things she says is, I adore furs, I worship furs, and they don't bring up furs until like one specific point in the movie, and then never again. Like they pretty much ignore the concept of furs, even though that would have been a lot more of a thing in the high fashion industry at the time. Like furs were just starting to become controversial, but like high fashion, like the Baroness, definitely would have been fine with it and not cared. But anyway, all they had to do was have her end up at that point. Like, it's still a little weird that she starts out so sympathetic, but you just tweak some things to have her go from sympathetic to a selfish monster who is happy in her life because she's completed her goal of becoming a fashion icon and a fashion mogul, a fashion mogul, and like has taken over this company and has everything she's ever wanted, but what she lost her humanity and she lost her friends along the way. But it's a story of the price of success and the price that she was willing to pay and she personally felt was worth it. That could have been a good story.
The only issue is then it's exactly The Devil Wears Prada.
That's true. That doesn't she chickens out at the end, doesn't she?
The main character does, but Meryl Streep doesn't.
Yeah. So yeah, it would have been like, yeah, like she ends up where Meryl Streep is in Devil Wears Prada, basically, but with a little extra Cruella for flair. And that would have been fun, and that would have been a solid movie, I think.
Well, let's just dive right into the spoiler verse, because we're essentially talking about how the movie ends without telling everyone how the movie ends. So
Yeah.
you can skip around this section if you want to not get spoiled for the movie. There's a time code in the description. You can skip around, but we are now inside the spoiler verse. Let's just talk about her changing motivations. Okay, so initially she feels bad because she thinks that she's responsible for her mother's death, and we're led to believe that Dalmatians killed her mom. And I'm like, oh boy, this is
the most shallow, ham-fisted way to introduce her not liking Dalmatian. And again, we're in spoilers now. It led nowhere, because at the end of the movie, she literally gives a Dalmatian puppy to both Anita and Roger. Roger, we're not sure why he's in the movie, but like it was a bunch of things that led nowhere.
But then it turns out the Baroness is the villain because she killed her mother.
Yeah, I mean, that was a good reveal. There were bad reveals, like that one I liked. I think it worked, and it was okay.
The setup was, if nothing else, then serviceable. You know, like
Yeah.
it was a good setup. They had set up enough weird stuff happening at that party that you weren't quite sure what was going on. There was like 5 different ways it could have gone, but you knew there was something going on.
And at the very least, at least that established like the central conflict where it's like Cruella wants to upstage the Baroness because she wants to get revenge for her mother.
Yeah, but the problem is the third change in motivation when she discovers that the Baroness is her biological mother, and she goes back into because that scene, like the scene where she's at the fountain talking to her mom, because like throughout the movie she goes to the fountain, she talks to her mom, and she's like, look, I hope you're proud of me, I'm trying to do better, I'm trying to be a good person. And then she goes up and she's like, it was all a lie, you were wrong, you were lying to me, I am a terrible person, descendant of a terrible person, and I don't care what you taught me anymore, I'm gonna go full evil. Which again was a setup for her going off the deep end, betraying Jasper's trust, actually, killing her mother at the end and everything. But then she turns around and she's like, but I still love you. And it's like, okay, but if you still love her, you're going to try to follow what she does instead of rejecting everything she taught you. And you're going to try to be a more loving person instead of leaning into, I'm going to become as bad as my mother, if not worse.
Well, they kind of did the whole concealed don't feel sort of like I almost felt like they copied Elsa's storyline, where like her adoptive mother, fearing that she would be just like her biological mother, like really like, kind of like you would say, like encouraged her like to not be mean to people and to like hide her hair and to like, I don't know, conform in a sense. And that kind of final epiphany where she's like, oh, like you were just trying to keep me from being who I am. It really breaks apart the nature versus nurture thing, because you would think the nurturing that she received would have just led to her accepting. It just struck me weird. It's like to think that her nature, just because she was born of this like evil woman, is so powerful that no matter what her life circumstances were up until that point, it just sort of became a justification for her being bad.
Yeah, it was a horrible message. And that whole monologue is so upsetting to listen to if she's supposed to be someone who is sympathetic and relatable, and you like and you understand, then it's a horrible message for her to be saying that she's being like, yeah, she's literally like, my adopted mother meant nothing. My being bad is in my genes, so I'm going to use that as an excuse to be a bad person because I can't help it. That's horrible.
It's like the end of her character development is where the beginning of Megaminds is. Where, like, he's a child and he's like, well, if I'm going to be bad, I'm going to be good at being bad. And that's where she ends her character development. So it would seem, but then after that, she goes back to being nice.
But then they go back to it. But it's like, I didn't like that monologue, but if they had kept that monologue without the I love you at the end, if they had just pushed a little harder so that it's clear, this is no longer a person we sympathize with or can relate to. This is a person who has decided to embrace the darkness within her and has decided that her excuse to do that is her terrible like family lineage, which is, you know, sins of the father, you know, that kind of like horrible way to look at the world, to be like, well, my mom was evil, so I must be evil. But at least if you ended on her being a villain and you're like, this is her reasoning, and it's clear that the movie is showing that is incorrect reasoning, but she is an iconic Disney villain, this is how she got this way, and then she goes on to, yeah, betray Jasper and maybe even like be the reason Jasper and Horace go to jail at the end and legitimately murder her mother and take over her mother's fashion industry that way. At least it would have been Cruella.
And yeah, and like, okay, this is kind of horrible, but you made the tie-in, like, she would pin the murder on Horace and Jasper, and that would explain Jasper's alcoholism in 101 Dalmatian.
Yeah, because we were watching that cartoon. Jasper is like a horrible, mean-spirited old grouch who thinks he's smarter than he is and is a huge alcoholic. And like, I don't know, I think that would have been a fun tie-in with the original, to be like, you cut to them in jail and you see him like take a drink from another prisoner or whatever, and it's like, it's the start of his descent into alcoholism because he got betrayed by his like foster sister / maybe love interest. It was not clear.
That was also a strange subplot.
I really liked this version of Horace and Jasper, and it just broke my heart to like see them kind of like go, and I appreciate how they stood up for themselves, but it
but
definitely
then they didn't.
Well, they did and they didn't, because it was a very abusive relationship, and you know, they could have left at any time, but they chose to stick around even though they were just, you know, obviously not happy with how they were being treated, which I don't know, makes me think of codependency. But again, like, I'm not an expert on these things, so I'm not going to presume that that's what their intention was.
I mean, I liked Jasper and Horace somewhat. I liked Horace more than Jasper, but even there, it was this strange thing where, like, Horace was being played as the idiot, but also just had moments of clarity where he was clearly seeing things better and smarter than Jasper. And even though in the original they were both idiots, but Jasper just thought more highly of himself, they were trying to set up Jasper to be the smarter one and the more insightful one. And he fluctuated. He wasn't always actually that insightful. And if he had been that insightful, he would have left at some point. Like, maybe he would have returned, but he would have left before they got arrested, you know? Like, I'm okay with him coming back because he cares about her and listens to her trauma. That was in character for what he was. But also so would have been, like, after the, like, I don't know where you would have put it because they needed to get arrested after the concert, but, like, he could have left at some point for a while, and then Horace gets arrested, and he could have been the one who helps Horace actually get out. And then, you know, you don't have the Terminator moment where Cruella drives into the front of the police station, but they kind of come back to her for the third act. It doesn't make sense. Like, she says one thing, and they're like, well, okay, you told us this one thing. We are now totally okay. And contextually, it didn't make sense. There were weird logic in all the character choices, except for the two characters who are one note, which would be Artie and the Baroness.
Well, to be fair, in the original, Horace did sometimes have moments of clarity where he was like, "Do you think the dogs are disguising themselves?" And the other two are like, "No, you're an idiot. They're just dogs." So like maybe that's what they were going for. That like Horace is a dumbass, but
Maybe,
sometimes he sees things that other people wouldn't.
but it didn't feel intentional enough to be that.
Yeah.
So there's something about the ending that I'm confused about because like the Cruella that like makes all the public appearances is like believed to have died, but then all of a sudden at the end of the movie there's Cruella Deville, and I'm like, does anyone seriously think these two women who look, sound, and dress the same are actually different people, or like
It's also the thing is also like, oh look, Cruella faked her death apparently, and that's why she's here. It stands to reason that Estella could have faked her death too.
Yeah, and also, I mean, their names are Cruella and Estella. Like, did they honestly look at that and be like, "Wow, that's weird"? Estella like left in her will all her inheritance to her friend Cruella in her will. That doesn't seem sus at all. Cruella, who there's no record of
existing?
anywhere. Yeah, like I don't see how you can like give your like legally give someone who doesn't exist your inheritance. That seems very difficult to do.
Especially because like her first employment at the fashion store was as Estella, not as Cruella. So there was literally no legal document about Cruella at all.
I mean, I'm no expert about wills, but I know from like leaving people's names on my as beneficiaries of my life insurance, I just had to provide a name and a date of birth. So I think they have to kind of more prove their identity on like the recipient end, which is where I think Cruella Deville, unless she adds faking IDs to her list of skills, would run into trouble.
Well, I mean, she can hotwire a car, and Jasper and Horace randomly become experts in electronics as well as covert operations, even though they were just small time thieves before. So who knows what they can do?
Yeah, I mean it was the 70s, so like some of that stuff would obviously be easier to do, but like yeah, still difficult, especially because at that point she doesn't have money at her disposal, right? Like I'm sure once she has the Baroness's money, she could find a good forger to make a fake birth certificate for Cruella Deville or whatever. But that's not she doesn't have access to that when she does all those weird legal shenanigans.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it seemed a tad over dramatic to like literally be like, yes, Estella died, like,
in the
and
same way that her adoptive mother died.
yeah, and like and once again, it's weird that they had that thing where it's like, the good parts of me died, and that could have worked in another way, but she's not an evil or particularly bad person at the end, so it just seems really over dramatic and cryptic.
And again, the thing I was alluding to earlier, Horace and Jasper still follow her even though she's going quote unquote full Cruella. Like, because even though they had that whole rant about Cruella as the one they don't want to help, they want to help Estella, she ends up committing to Cruella and they're like, oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
But they're
they literally,
family.
when they thought she died, they were literally like, let's never speak of Cruella again and just remember Estella because she was the good one and she was the one we knew. We didn't know Cruella and Cruella was a horrible person to us.
And also the found family, again, kind of everything emotional there was undercut by either she's going to become Cruella and then clearly she doesn't care about Jasper and Horace, or she's not, but then what are you doing?
Well, again, that's why we have to like, if this is a reimagining, whatever. And this is a spoiler for you guys, but they have announced that they're going to be doing a follow up to this because I guess it's been successful enough. So whatever the next chapter of the story looks like, it will be a reimagined, and so the relationship she has with Horace and Jasper will be different because their backstory is very different from. Like, we don't
Okay,
really get any sense that they knew each other when they were kids
okay, but if the
in the
movie
Yeah.
original
was
stuff.
successful, if the movie was successful, was it successful enough for those characters to warrant a sequel? Like I get it because it was a big nostalgia bomb, so are you really sure these characters are able to carry this through. I don't think so. Like,
Yeah, in
yeah.
the original, like they're clearly just some two-bit thieves who just got out of jail, and they're dealing with this eccentric rich woman who they bit off more than they can chew, and they tried 3 times to quit and she won't let them. And because she's rich and powerful, they're like, oh shoot, now she's kind of got us in her crosshairs, so we can't not do what she says, so we'll just try to get this job done so we can get out of here. And she is horribly abusive to them in the cartoon, right? But it's like, yeah, they're like literally like henchmen, underlings, and she has no empathy for anyone in her heart, so like it makes sense. She can't. Yeah, it's such a different dynamic, and they tried to kind of do that in the latter half of this movie, and it was very weird because it was like, these are your brothers basically, who you're treating like that and who you're calling imbeciles and all this stuff, when they like they are probably they let you into their cute little warehouse, abandoned warehouse home, and went out of their way to help you try to get out of this life, even when they clearly didn't want more. They didn't have bigger aspirations, and they knew you did, and they went out of their way for you to help you with that.
And even if you're going for the she's turning into her mother, it would have made a lot more sense if she started changing the way she treated them after that scene in the restaurant where, like,
Where her
the
mom
baroness,
tells
yeah, the
her.
baroness basically tells her, I'm pretty sure you're Cruella, and we'll see if you have the guts to actually beat me, because you need to have that. If that would have been the point where she started mistreating them, it would have made more sense, but that happens kind of in the middle.
Yeah,
I just had a great idea.
Mm.
Instead of this follow-up, instead of it being like essentially a remake of 101 Dalmatians, what if they went with their original idea for the Rescuers, and they have Emma Stone Cruella be the villain of a live-action Rescuers movie?
I mean, yeah, because the villain wasn't as completely heartless. She was just using a child, and you could get some interesting themes of her using a child the way she was used, and then be like, oh wait, maybe not, maybe that's not a great thing, and have a redemption arc. That would be interesting. I like that idea.
Just no mice, please. I don't want CGI mice. Like, make Bianca and Bernard just actual people who have like come to like try and rescue her. Ugh.
Okay, fine.
Make them the borrowers, like little tiny people.
Sure, if this is, it's, I mean, it's the same kind of universe where someone can be born with black and white hair, so why not have little tiny people?
Which apparently, okay, we were talking about this earlier, it should have at least been genetic, like her dad should have had it or something.
Or like her mother, but she's hiding it, or like her mother had black hair and her father white hair. And because I feel like there's also this massive symbolism about her evil side and good side being the black and white that could have been played into, but nope, there's nothing.
Yeah, and even like we were talking about earlier with Jasper and Horace sticking around when they shouldn't, you could have, and with the fact that her biological mother is a monster who wanted to have her like drowned like a kitten when she was born, right?
Like in Batman Returns.
Ugh, yeah, it's you could have explored the theme of toxic family, and that could have been interesting, and that is something that kind of you don't see a lot in movies but does happen in real life a lot. And you could either have focused on that with Jasper and Horace, that it's like that they're stuck in this toxic situation, but they feel they have this loyalty and like trying to break out of that, and showing how she takes advantage as she becomes a worse and worse person. She takes advantage of their love and loyalty and manipulates them.
And she could have doubled down and have that be the newfound dynamic between her and Mark Strong's character.
Yeah, like
who also had weird motivations, like kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and or they could have focused more and explored more of that thing with her mom. Like, if once again, if it wasn't Cruella de Vil, and they just stripped that away, and it was like a movie about some random person, then they could have explored that idea with her mom of being like, I am not my mother. I came from this horrible background, this horrible lineage, and I have to deal with that now, and there's healing I have to do about that. But I don't have to be that way just because of my mother. Like, that's another interesting thing to explore. But instead, they just, for both of those things, they have both of those things in the movie, but just a bit, and don't explore them at all, except for that weird monologue.
Which
at
again,
the fountain.
the point where it's placed doesn't make much sense. And another thing, like we talked about the music, there's some real bops in it. It would have been so much better if she would have just completely lost it and gone full Cruella after the ball where she has the red dress, as Stone Cold Crazy by Queen starts playing. Like, how great would that be that that was her turning point? And then that song would have been way better.
Yo, when she drove the car into the police station, did that not feel like exactly how Harley Quinn broke into the police station in Birds of Prey? Like, I was getting deja vu. It was very similar, but like bad because it didn't suit the character. I like threw up inside my mouth a little when at the beginning when she's like a kid and she was like, "I am woman, hear me roar," as she's punching a little British boy, and I was like, "Shut up."
Oh yeah, and co-ed schools in the 50s in England, come on.
The feminism was
Ham-fisted.
aggressive and disgusting. I hated it. It was not good feminism.
So, coming around to final thoughts, there was a point early on in the movie where I thought I was seeing where it was going. It seemed to be telling a rags to riches story, and it was going to establish Cruella essentially by the end of this movie to be the character we would see in 101 Dalmatians. But the movie that I imagined is not the movie I got. And we've just spent almost an hour just ripping this poor thing to shreds. Despite all of that, I still enjoyed it. I guess because of my like less passion for this like air quotes franchise, I'm more forgiving, and I'm generally pretty forgiving of movies. So I enjoyed it, but it is I don't even know if I want to recommend it to people, to be honest. And especially seeing like in Canada, you had to pay $35 to watch it on Disney Plus. I definitely won't encourage people to like get the premier access, like wait for it to be free and then watch it.
Yeah, Raya is on Disney Plus now, so we could have just waited and just do that for Cruella.
So, I mean, I'll give this movie like maybe 2.4 out of 4 back cookies.
Yeah, I had high hopes for this movie because it was such a crazy concept that I thought it would at least be an entertaining train wreck. And kind of, but not. They didn't commit hard enough to anything to earn my respect. That's the thing. I'll always respect like a strong try and fail more than a whimper that's kind of trying. And it just didn't quite go hard enough. And if they had just actually made her a villain at the end, the entire movie would have been way better. So yeah, I'm gonna give it like, what is it? It's out of 5?
Out of 4.
Out of 4, right? Yeah, I'm gonna give it like a 1.5. The half is for the style. Like it's gorgeous to look at, and some of the montage stuff is creative and fun. They do some interesting things with showing the magazines and things like that. Like they had visually, they put more thought into the visuals than they did the characters or the plot or the focus, which is unfortunate because you need all of those things in order to really enjoy visuals.
Yeah, so final thoughts. Maybe it's because I'm starting to be more critical of movies, but I was taken out a lot during this movie by small details and inconsistencies. I echo that it is not the movie I expected. And I still think Disney remakes are a nostalgia money grab that should never exist, in this one particularly, because it ruins a good villain. Also, my last thing that I didn't say, I feel like they were trying to go for a Harley Quinn thing, and that did not work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say 1.7 out of 4 bad cookies.
So Cruella is in theaters where movie theaters are open, and it's available on Disney Plus for premier access. But like I said, and like we've kind of said, it's not worth paying money for. if you're interested at all, check it out when it's available for free on Disney Plus.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
All right, it's time to go inside the Bat Jar and pull out a topic for next week. Should we pull something out, or should we just commit to discussing the first episode of Loki next week, or should we, I don't know, like Zack Snyder's new zombie movies on Netflix?
I don't know. When we did Snowy Owl and when we did WandaVision, we did it at the end, right?
We did WandaVision after the first 3 episodes had come out.
Okay. And then
we did Falcon Winter Soldier at the end. So
I think we should do it at the end, honestly. I think it worked better.
Yeah. Because especially with WandaVision, like half the things we thought were happening were not real.
Yeah.
And do you care at all about the Zack Snyder zombie movie? I don't.
No, if you want to put Zack Snyder as a whole in the Bat Jar podcast, I will rant about #restore the Snyderverse, but
or how he literally doesn't know how to make movies. He knows how to make miniseries. Like, he cannot make any cut that's like movie length.
All right, I just pulled out the topic. What makes a good sequel?
Ooh, nice. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about.
Oh yeah,
This
two videos on YouTube I'm gonna definitely rewatch. One of them is the Shafrillis video on why Shrek 2 is the perfect sequel, and the other one is gonna be the sequelitis for Legend of Zelda.
Oh yeah.
They're good videos. I recommend them. One's by Shafrillis Production. The other one was a video Ego Raptor from Game Grumps made.
We should start asking for sponsorship for all these people we're plugging.
Sure.
So
forward, it'll eventually come back.
Yeah, who knows? So come back to the Batchar podcast next week when we talk about what makes a good sequel. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
I'm Mjolnir.
Catch you on the flip side.
Cruella was Estella.
Toodles!